right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to A Deep Calls Deep. We were supposed to do this last week, but life happens for everybody. So we we pushed it to today. But hopefully it will definitely be worth it. So I am very excited to welcome back my good friend Adam Tibbett over at Linguist-Amo. He and I survived we were like combat buddies for finishing seminary together.
We were. That was brutal.
That was brutal. That was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life is survive an oral defense. So anyway, welcome back to the channel, Adam. We always have a good time when you're here, and we've got some really fun, doozy kinds of stuff here. We're going to get really deep into your specialty of ancient Near East cultures and languages and really play with that for a little bit. And then I'm going to do the second half, and we're going to get all fun with some Orthodox theology, pulling in this and how in the world what in the world do these baddies of the Old Testament have to do with us now? So it's going to be a fun one. Buckle up. So anybody that is watching that hasn't been around or is new to the channel and doesn't know who you are, Adam, introduce yourself to them, where they can find you, and what was your favorite part about getting deep into ancient Near East cultures?
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Adam. I currently have 2 master's degrees, one from Liberty University in Biblical Studies, and my second MA was in the Old Testament. So that was pretty cool. One of the coolest things about that was I got trained in Akkadian. That was a wild language. So currently I'm trying to organize everything for my PhD. We're not sure where we're going. But it'll be somewhat focused on the A&E as well, as far as history and cultures and language are concerned. What got me into this stuff? Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. How much time do we have?
Give us like a minute and a minute and a half.
Okay, clock me. I got to lock in. Yeah. So it kind of started when I was a kid. I got introduced to Charlton Heston's The 10 Commandments, which started my love for ancient Egypt. And then I don't want to say spiraled. I want to say it just fueled my desire even more, just from going from Egypt then to Mesopotamia and stuff. And then and it didn't really start until later. I was kind of like into classics, like the current debate with everyone is the Iliad and the Odyssey right now, but it did start with that in my early 20s. And after that, it was just I just became this avaricious reader for history and stuff, meticulous and everything. And then the languages came. But I didn't start my college. I didn't do my undergrad, which was English Lit, until I was 33. So that we're going back a bit. And then I started in biblical studies. I wanted to do Egyptology first. Applied twice to the same program and got rejected twice. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's not for me. Maybe that's the Lord telling me, okay, well, you're not going that way, you're going this direction. So we'll see with the PhD. But as far as everything's concerned, I absolutely love reading about ancient history, its languages and cultures. It's funny because I didn't even know some cultures existed, like Ugarit. Who'd ever heard of Ugarit? I didn't even know they existed until I got to grad school. So
yeah, just a fun fact about Adam, he absolutely loves Kinham and the Expedition Bible channels. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
it's fun to rib at him a little bit because both of us really absolutely don't appreciate those channels at all. Because
I posted about him today on social media.
Oh, we should do another reaction to that. Because that was
Expedition Bible. That's right. Yeah, we did. We did.
Like, what in the world was that was fun. Oh my goodness.
That was the beginning of the year.
That was back before second semester, and I can't believe you did a thesis in one semester. I had a year of
it wasn't even a thesis. It was a capstone paper, and they were like, okay, it's capstone paper. It's got to be 20 to 25. You can go over 25, but I know a master's thesis is like 50 pages minimum. I don't know what the word count for that. 300 words a page times 50,
I had 20,000 words and 85 pages.
Yeah. See? That's
That
like
was crazy. But I started doing my Baruch series and going through a lot of the stuff that I learned out of that. Baruch's amazing. Like if you guys catch that, because Baruch is absolutely an amazing book. There's so much intersections from intertextuality all over the place. And anyway, but we are here to talk about
get carried away.
Adam knows a lot. I mean, people like to point at me and be like, "Oh, ancient Near East." I'm like, no, I'm Adam is just totally smokes me on this stuff. He does, and that's why I love having him on, because I'm like, okay, I get to enjoy nerding out to everything that Adam knows about the ancient Near East. So we are
like
going
a
to talk
gremlin
about
in the
three nations in the Old Testament who are infamous for being bad guys. So Adam, I picked and then gave them to you, and you were like enthusiastically, hey, two of those sound a lot of fun, but I'm not sure about the third one. But we're going to talk about the Hittites, the the Amalekites, and the Moabites, and not necessarily in that order. So we're going to start with the Hittites. So Adam, I'm going to just hand over the reins to you, and you are just going to run with it. Who are the Hittites, and why do they matter in the Old Testament?
Well, the Hittite Empire can be divided into like Egypt, Old and New Kingdoms. There's a Middle Kingdom in Egypt. It doesn't exist with the Hittite Empire, and it kind of starts at the end of the third millennium BC. At that time, the Middle Assyrian Empire was ruling. At that time, the Middle Assyrian Empire was the powerhouse at that time, and it was more of a merchant empire. They would establish trade networks throughout Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, and the Levant, and down into Mesopotamia. So that went on for about 150 years. So we're looking at dates around 1670 to 1400 BC. As far as the Hittites are concerned, when it was under the old Assyrian trade network. And they would trade silver, gold, copper, because it was the Bronze Age, barley and wool with other nation groups, other ethnic groups in Anatolia, as well as other Indo-Europeans. What's interesting about the Hittite Empire is they're actually Indo-European. They're not Semitic at all. So they more or less may have migrated from the Caucasus Mountains down, which is maybe their origin. Some scholars think that they were indigenous to Turkey, but there's a little debate about that. We also have.
Well, can I ask you a question here? Because I think I seem to remember you and I talked about the Hittites way back about a year or so ago in an episode that we did. And if memory serves, that it also kind of is an umbrella term for mercenaries that kind of come from all over and kind of congregate together. So Hittite is more of a title than a tribe or a nation.
In the Iron Age, it was. They became so if you want to really fast forward here into the Iron Age, the Hittite Empire collapsed because of the late Bronze Age collapse. There are several factors there that caused it. You could say weather, you could say earthquakes, you could say population migrations, droughts, famines could have caused that. The Hittite Empire wasn't the only one that collapsed. There were several others. The Egyptian Empire collapsed. The Assyrian Empire collapsed, leaving this vacuum of power. Well, what was left over, specifically with the Hittites, was a remnant of the Hittites. So we get these Neo-Hittite states north of the Levant and in Anatolia. And that's where we come into contact with, say, Uriah the Hittite, for example. He was part of these Neo-Hittite city-states that filled that power vacuum in the early Iron Age until the Neo-Assyrian Empire came into existence and everything. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've got the Hittites show up in a few different places. The first place we see them is Ephron the Hittite in Genesis 23. And this is after Sarah dies. And they are in the land of Canaan. And Abraham is grieving for his wife. And he gets up and he goes to the Hittites. Now, are we talking about the Bronze Age nation here, or are we talking about the Iron Age mercenaries here?
At this time, Genesis seems to paint a picture of the patriarchs living in the Middle Bronze Age, which is 2000 to 1550 BC. We think Abraham existed lived lived in the 18th, roughly the 18th, 17th, I'd say 18th or 19th century. So the 1800s and the 1700s BC is when we think Abraham existed, which would put it more than likely with the Hittite Empire rather than the Neo-Hittite states.
Okay, because it's really interesting that they get tied to the nation of Israel there.
Yeah.
Because they bury Sarah there. And then her grave, her tomb, because it would be more of a tomb at this point, was a point of pilgrimage for a very long time, until I think the diaspora, if I remember correctly. So you've got this really interesting intersection between pre-Sinai Israel and the nation of the Hittites, which seem rather peaceful and amiable at this point.
Yeah, they were on friendly terms because at this time there were vassals. You would either side. Well, no, that's later. It's late Bronze Age. But the Hittites extended deep into the northern Levant at this time, or during this time. So there would be friendly Hittites. The Hittites were more or less friendly outside. It was more they had territorial disputes with to the west and the north rather than to the east, especially because you had the Mitanni there. That was this. They were trying to create a buffer zone between the two, so they didn't want to expand any further east. And of course, there were merchants throughout this time, which is where we get. Oh shoot, I forget his name. But Abraham, bought a cave to bury Sarah. Yeah, so yeah, they were everywhere in that area.
Yeah.
So they had a military presence, as well as an economic presence, if you will.
Yeah, and what they're doing here, the way that it is, like Ephron is who Abraham is talking to, and he's like, "Let me buy a piece of land," and gives him 400 shekels of silver as the price between bury your dead. And Ephron at first refuses that offer, but then Abraham was like, "No, I'm insisting." And so they do what is not really what we would consider a contract, but this is a covenant between the two of them. Yeah. Because it's not, we're not thinking modern law. This is, all of these kinds of deals you need to put in the context of covenant. So this is really interesting, because the next time we see the Hittites, Adam, is Deuteronomy 7:1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are about to enter and occupy it, he clears away many nations before you. First ones listed, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites. Those 7 got to go. So what happens, Adam, between making nice with Abraham in Genesis and getting kicked out by God in Deuteronomy?
So what was going on? We had the new kingdom. So at this time, the old kingdom collapsed. They had a succession crisis every time, which left the government weak, and the neighbors came in, weakened it. Then there was a period of decline for about 100 years. And then about 1400 BC, the new empire, the new kingdom came into existence. And let me just find my notes here. So I'm going to say some names that are really difficult. So it really started with a guy called Shupi Lu Liuma I. It took me quite a while to get that one down, a long time ago. But he's the one that started the new kingdom, and he actually initiated some reforms, military reforms, pacified the borders, extended the borders into, I think, almost all of Anatolia. What happened to the termites? Sorry. So he really set the standard for the new kingdom for the Hittites, and it was really smooth smooth going down until you get to the late Bronze Age collapse, which is what I think I've mentioned that already, where this is the time of the Sea Peoples. The Philistines came, the Cheker, I can't even name them all right now, but you get it. The Sea Peoples migrated. We think they were more or less from Greece. and they tried to attack Egypt, and then they settled. The Philistine tribe of the Sea People settled in the southern Levant. So, from what we've gathered, at least in scripture, we know that the Canaanites were, or I know I'm kind of deviating a little bit here, but they started practice. It was idolatry. It wasn't even that. I think there was child sacrifice in some of them. Again, I know I'm getting ahead here on that one, that
Yeah,
bit.
that's okay.
But we don't really, as far as evil is concerned, it may have just been idolatry for the most part. But what really damaged the Hittite New Kingdom was the Iron Age, or the late Bronze Age collapse. When I said drought, famine, plague, and possibly, if dare I say, climate change, if you will, like earthquakes, whatnot. So,
well, that's at the top of God's no list is idolatry.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that automatically makes them on the list of no's. So, and now I'm really curious again, because I think the next time we see them show up is 2 Samuel 11. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, because we're back to being buddies with Israel again, because David has Hittite mercenaries in the force that he is using when Joab fought against Rabha of the Ammonites and took the royal city. So Jerusalem gets captured, and David, to take back Jerusalem, has Hittite mercenaries with them. Yes. So we are in the second phase in the Iron Age here, right? And now we've got Hittites, landless band of mercenaries that could be good, bad, or indifferent. We don't really know, but these are soldiers for hire. So talk to us a little bit about that, Adam. How did we get from out God casting them out to now they're hired reinforcements?
He's using them. He's right. Using the Hittites.
Right.
So, like I said, this is the Neo-Hittites. So you have several Hittite city-states that claim to be Hittites, but we all know in reality they're not Hittites because the Hittite Empire collapsed. So you get people like Uriah. You get this is where Uriah. I'm going to focus in a little bit on Uriah here. This is where Uriah comes in. Does it ever say? I can't think of the top. Does it really say where, besides labeling him as a Hittite, does it really say where exactly he's from?
I don't think so. It just labels him as Uriah the Hittite. Yeah. It tells us who his father is, but we don't get a city.
That's the arm of the chair just moved. I'm sorry. Sorry, the chair's attacking. Of live streaming. The chair's attacking. Of course, it has to do this live. I've never seen that happen. So yeah, so Uriah, we don't really know where he's from. We just know he's a Hittite, and yeah, he was more than likely a mercenary. So, to the extent of it, that's pretty much all where it was. Whereas the city-states ruled locally. Uriah probably found some sort of business or found a job as commander in David's army, probably, and taking back Jerusalem. So, and of course, my mind just wants to go to what happened later with David and a certain woman. But yeah.
It's very interesting because, you've got Hittites tied to Jerusalem with Abraham in a peace and making, a covenant to allow them to have the rights to bury Sarah and to visit Sarah. And then you've got where they're kicked out of the land because their society has fallen into just debauchery and paganism and just the kind of the lay of the land of everybody around that period of time, because most of those 7 nations on God's list all had significant issues. Yeah. And then they're back because they have been thrown out of the land. They are homeless, and the culture and the whole global system collapsed and is rebooted. And now they are not a nation with an anchor point anymore. They are kind of pocket tribes. And anybody who, if I understand it correctly from our last conversation, anybody who kind of wanted to be a mercenary was kind of referred to as a Hittite, but not like genetically or culturally or because they lived in a specific place.
Yeah. So there were no cultural ties to the Hittite Empire that existed. It was like maybe some echoes of the Hittite Empire, but they were not like Hittites. But we labeled them the Neo-Hittite states because they thought of themselves as Hittite.
So was Bathsheba a Hittite then, because she was Uriah's wife and he was a Hittite?
My guess is yes. I think she was a Hittite, who was ritualistically bathing, by the way. She wasn't just showing
Yeah.
off her.
No.
But anyway, that's another story. But yeah, I think definitely she was a Hittite too. I think they both came down from, it could have been Carchemish. That was a Neo-Hittite city at the time. It could have been
Mhm.
Aleppo or Alalak. I'm not sure if anyone here knows who those cities are other than Carchemish.
I
Carchemish,
do, but
Carchemish, definitely, because that shows up. But I think they were both Hittites, though. I think that makes the
Mhm.
most sense.
Well, that's also really interesting because you've got God saying, don't marry foreign women. And
Mhm.
David, who's already married to a few women by this point,
Yeah.
goes and takes a foreign wife, and she becomes the mother of the king who ends the United Kingdom, which is really
Yeah, who ended
interesting
the
to me.
monarchy. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
Solomon is a very successful disaster.
Yeah, it was. It's crazy.
He's a very infamous figure, and we should do a video on the
Yeah.
United Kingdom one of these days because that's fascinating stuff. How all that kind of stuff went down in the temple and the tabernacle and all that. It's crazy fun.
Yeah,
So,
for
so
sure.
Adam, what else do we need to know? Talk to us a little bit about because the great Indo-European empire of Anatolia, which is now modern day Turkey. That's
Yes.
kind of the region we're talking about. Talk about the linguistic significance of the Hittite language. So,
So, yeah.
how does that influence everything here?
So the Hittite language, it's actually called Hittite. There were other several languages in the area that there was, but oddly enough, Hittite was the language of the Hittites was deciphered in 1913, so that recently, by a Czech linguist. And he had problems trying to come up with the language because you had Luwian, which is a hieroglyph alphabet, like or not alphabet. It was a hieroglyphic syllabary or whatever, much like the Egyptian hieroglyphs. So he came in contact with Luwian. Then there was cuneiform. And most of the time, I want to say, if I get this right, I didn't put this bit in the notes. I want to say that Hittite was written in cuneiform, and Luwian was written for another language, Luwian. So there were two languages going on at the same time. It's something similar to hieroglyphs in hieratic in Egypt. You had two different writing systems, so they used cuneiform and Luwian. So, but we didn't know the Hittite language until rather recently in 1913, compared to like Egyptian or Akkadian. So when we deciphered that, then yeah, then we found a whole slew of things like um, there's a connection with uh, the Iliad and the Odyssey with as far as some of these words are concerned, like the Hittites may have warred with the Greeks at the late Bronze Age, which is around a certain time for a certain when it's about Homer wrote about. So
Mm-hmm.
that's as far as the language. It's an Indo-European language. It's not Semitic. That's what threw them off at first was that it was an Indo-European language. They were expecting a Semitic language, with verb stems, like the kal, the piel, the puel, etc., and it didn't have that at all. So,
So, for Adam, for people who don't know what you're talking about with the difference between a Semitic and an Indo-European language, like just give us a quick breakdown. What's the difference?
so the difference between a Semitic language and Indo-European language is there aren't verb tenses in Semitic. They do verb stems,
Mhm.
and then they have imperfect and perfect in a sense. So if you wanted to express the future, you would use the imperfect tense. And if you wanted to use causative, you would use a certain verbal stem in the imperfect tense. If you wanted to use past tense, you would use perfect, if you would, and then you would attach a verb stem to it. Indo-European languages don't do that. We just have past, present, future. Some languages have present progressive. Some languages don't. Spanish and English have present progressive. I am going to start up my computer, for example, whereas in German, you just start up your computer. And that may not mean context would dictate if you meant right now or in the future. So that's kind of the difference between the two. We don't
Yeah.
have verbal stems, whereas they do.
I I still remember sitting in Hebrew class going over all of those Piel, Puel, Pael, just like,
with the
oh Lord.
menorah.
It was just, oh my goodness. So for people who are wondering, because this question popped into my head, just to be like, for people who are listening, where does Greek fall? Is it Semitic or Indo-European?
Greek is an Indo-European language. It's not part of one of the branches. It has its own branch. So
okay. So just to clarify for everybody, because my favorite are the Semitic ones, because I love Hebrew and Aramaic, and they're I have thoughts about Greek, but nobody who's known me very long has not heard my opinion about Greek. All right. So is there anything else that would be really helpful, you think, for us to know about the Hittites before we move on to the next one?
Not really. The only I can think of, I've got a boatload, but it was all about the Hittite Empire, and then we would sort of feed off into, it was the Neo-Hittites. I knew we were going to discuss like the Neo-Hittites mainly because that's the only one that shows up in the Bible, with the exception of Genesis, because that's, although it's written in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, I think. I know there's debate about when Genesis and the Pentateuch was written, whether it's late, whether it's early, or whether it's mid. But the context of Genesis puts Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob within the new kingdom of the Hittites, and it puts it into the second intermediate period with Egypt. I don't know if maybe people here know what the second intermediate. It's the Egyptians are completely different topic.
That would be another fun video to do, is to go through some of these periods and some of these, but.
Yeah,
it's Abraham, two different groups we're talking about, though. Between Abraham and David, it's two different groups of Hittites.
Yes, that's what. Yeah, in a nutshell, yes, that's it. So yeah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, new kingdom Hittite. Then you get to the united monarchy and the divided monarchies. It's the Neo-Hittites.
Okay, that's really, really helpful, I think. And for what we're going to do later, I'm going to pin on the second section of the Hittites. I'm going to pin more on the mercenary, Iron Age Hittites, and not so much the first. But it's really nice to get that, kind of clarify that and get the full picture of kind of what's happening there. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think we've covered a little bit. So just so we can kind of get all this in our heads. Religious practice wise, so we're speaking like their liturgical sacramental practices. How different would that have been from, like, let's say, the tabernacle to what the Bronze Age Hittites would have been doing?
It would have been extremely different. Most of the parallels that we get in the tabernacle are with Mesopotamia or Egypt, strongly Egypt. So it's very little with the Hittites and the empire. They worship multiple gods. They were polytheistic. They had a storm god and a sun god, sun goddess, excuse me. And there were several other gods as well that they worshiped, but it was wholly different when you put it against an ancient Near Eastern backdrop with say the Canaanite gods, with El, with Baal, with Chemosh, etc. So, or even the Egyptian pantheon. So, it's really night and day when it comes to that. Although they did worship several gods. We've got in their capital of Hattusha, they had several temples in the upper city, and that's where all the temples were. The lower city didn't have really any temples. There may have been some shrines, but if you want to do some worship, you'd go up to the upper city and they'd sacrifice. That's about the only thing common. I think everyone sacrificed a bull.
Yeah.
In the ancient world. So
cultically, they still are having high sacred spaces. They're still offering sacrifices. It's just a very different, I don't know,
cosmic
method
mountain.
Or
they had a cosmic mountain. I forget where that cosmic mountain was in Hittite, but they had a cosmic mountain. So much like Yahweh has Mount Zion, Baal had Zaphon, and El has the source of the two rivers, which is Mount Lel, L-E-L. So yeah, the idea of the cosmic mountain is there.
So there's enough similarities that we can kind of hang our hats on. They've got the high places, they've got the temples, they've got the sacrifices. They just have a different pantheon who behaves differently, but not so differently that it would have been completely foreign. It just would have been, I don't know, Italians versus Greeks or something. I don't know, kind of just very different. I just pulled two things out of my hat off the top of my head, but it would have been culturally very different of the same cultic type of practice. Okay, so I think that's helpful. Are we ready we're gonna, I think, jump in really quick to, what should I give you second? The Moabites?
Yeah, we can do that.
The Moabites.
We can do the
Moabites. The Moabites are a fun bunch of guys.
They are, my gosh.
Guys, let's get into the Moabites. Who the heck are the Moabites?
So the Moabites show up in the archaeological record in the 13th century, which is when Ramesses II lived. I almost said existed again. Lived. Yes, if depending on your Exodus view, he's the pharaoh of the Exodus. If he's not, then it's someone earlier. So he shows up in the Ramesseum, which is a huge temple in Egypt. It was a temple complex of Ramesses II, with Moab being one of the territories that Ramesses II conquered. And they worshipped a deity called Chemosh. Now, other than that, we don't really have a lot to go on in the late Bronze Age, so we have to fast forward to the Iron Age, roughly the 9th century. And this is when we encounter, in 2 Kings 3, this is where we encounter the Mesha Stele, or the Moabite stone, that details the battle, the war between Israel, the northern kingdom Israel, and Moab. Moab was a vassal of Israel at this time. And, as the story goes, Israel went down, defeated them. And then the Moabite king, Mesha, sacrifices his son or his daughter, sacrifices his offspring, and the tide turns. So that's the extent. And the Moabite stone actually parallels the account in 2 Kings 3. Not verbatim, but it's pretty close. So actually, I have a quote here from it, from Theodore Lewis in his book on the origin and character of God. He says that Mesha bragged that he dragged the vessels of Yahweh from a sanctuary at the Reubenite town of Nebo before his god Chemosh, in this type of divine harem warfare. So you have harem warfare that we see so prevalent in Numbers, Deuteronomy, the book of Joshua.
Right. So for people
doing that, they do it too at Moab.
Right.
So they were doing it.
So
too.
For people who don't know what harem warfare is, Adam, what is harem warfare?
That is when you take religious vessels and separate them for destruction. It could be temples. It's usually inanimate objects or religious vessels rather than humans. I know there's a debate about the genocide, Joshua in the book of Joshua and blah, blah, blah. But normally when it comes to harem warfare, you devote their religious objects, their idols even, to destruction. You separate them and you devote them to destruction. It could be clothes even. That's what we see with Achan. He stole this like elaborate Babylonian robe for himself, along with other things, but and his whole his whole family got was stoned to death and everything. So that's
right, because they take the sacred things, and so that's where you see the Assyrians cart off a bunch of sacred stuff, and then again the Babylonians, when they destroyed the temple, cart off a whole bunch more sacred stuff. This is that same thing we're talking about. Okay,
Roddy's correct, make sure. By the way.
Okay.
Roddy's correct. They're descendants of Lot.
Yeah. So So we first see them in the Old Testament in Genesis 19. We see Lot went up out of Zoar and is settling in the hills with his 2 daughters, and he was afraid to stay there. So he was in a cave. And this is that notorious story of the 2 the daughters getting their fathers drunk and impregnating themselves, and to continue that line of Lot. And the firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. And he is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. And the younger bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. And he is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this
Yes.
day. So the product of that behavioral choice by those daughters set a whole bunch of badness loose in the Old Testament for the rest of history.
Yeah.
Like, talk about cosmic consequences to bad choices.
Jeez.
My goodness. That's crazy. So the second place we see them pop up is Numbers 25. And while Israel was staying at Shittim, the people begin to have relations with the women of Moab. So they're their own place by now. By the book of between Genesis and Numbers, they've collected enough to become a nation of some sort. And these people invited the people to sacrifice to their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. Thus Israel yoked itself to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger kindled against Israel. So, Adam, Baal of Peor. Who is Baal of Peor?
So Baal of Peor is usually when you get these like before they actually took possession of the promised land. You had God, like there would be a theophany, and that theophany would be a locale or a place name, and they would attach the God who appeared there. So Baal of Peor. So before I mentioned Baal of Peor, they were attached to these. It was a decentralized worship prior to the Israelites entering into the promised land. So you had El Olam, which is mentioned in So El Olam, El Roi, mentioned in Genesis 16. You had El Olam, you had El Berith, God of the covenant. El Olam, which is God of eternality. El Roi, the God who sees. You had all these different place names. Beit El, the house of God, it's a place name. That's where a theophany perhaps happened, or the God made himself known, and they created like a worship, so like an altar there. Baal Peor is one of those. Like it wasn't just El, like, and even before I dive into that, El could also be the generic word for God, just God. It doesn't have to be El as in the Canaanite El, like the head of the pantheon El. We don't think that's what's going on here. It's like decentralized worship where God was attached to a certain site. Baal Peor fits that description. So Baal, the people who worship Baal Peor are worshiping Baal who appeared at that site, Peor, or So that's what's going on with Baal there. He manifested himself there, and they called him Baal Peor.
Okay, that's really helpful to kind of clarify, because you see a lot of Baals running around in the Old Testament.
Yeah,
and
you see
so
Baal. I can't even tell. And Baal may not even be. That may just be an epithet, because in Hebrew, Baal just means Lord or Master. So all we know is it's a storm deity, but that's it. So
he also. Sorry, he also goes by Enlil, which is my favorite. My favorite Old Testament bad God there listed, Enlil, and the lightning. And
there's several Baals running on, because there are different manifestations of Baal at different locales in the Levant. So it was the same with this god El. We don't know. Now Genesis or Exodus 6:3 says, well, El there, I did not make my name known to you, like to the patriarchs. They just knew him as El. They didn't know Yahweh was his name, but they were worshiping Yahweh before the Israelites came in. So
okay, the next place we see the Moabites is in the Judges 3, which is a really fun story for Sunday school, little like grade school boys. Love this story a lot. This is Eglon and the king. And so Israel had done, this is Ehud, right? So Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and Eglon of Moab was against Israel, and because of what they'd done evil in the sight. So he teams up with the Ammonites and the Amalekites. So this is one place where we see the Amalekites show up, and went down and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of palms. And they served the king of Eglon of Moab for 18 years. But Israel cried out to the Lord, and God raised up Ehud, son of Jerah, the Benjamite, which is really interesting. When they always mention a tribe, you always want to pay attention, because there's always something good there. But who was left-handed, which is a very interesting detail to add. And Israel sent tribute to King Eglon, and Ehud made him a sword and put it under his thigh on the opposite side that you would expect, because he was left-handed. And he is the one who pulled out his sword and stabbed King Eglon in the restroom, and nobody wanted to disturb him because they thought he was just sitting there for a long time.
Too.
They were too embarrassed to go in and look. But Ehud escaped during the delay and passed beyond the sculptured stones, which is really interesting detail too to put in there. So basically,
it's like an idol, maybe.
Yeah, Moab got together with two other of the notorious enemies of Israel, the Ammonites and the Amalekites, took over Israel, and we're still pre-monarchy. So this is time of Joshua Judges are kind of happening at the same time in this weird long overlap here. So we're still in the what's the name of it? The God monarchy. I can't remember. There's a name for that, and I'm just not.
The United Monarchy?
Maybe.
It's
just falling out of my head. There's a name, where a government system where the deity is the monarch.
Theocracy.
Yeah, there you go. A theocracy. They're still a theocracy at this point. So it's very interesting that they come and take over part of. But there's a couple of details in there I wanted to just have you kind of talk about, because it makes a very specific point that when Ehud escaped, while they were delayed, being embarrassed to see who was going to go check on the king, he passed beyond the sculptured stones and goes to Sariah. What are those sculptured stones there that he runs by, Adam?
My guess is, since we're talking about the Moabites, these sculptured stones were probably idols to Chemosh. That's exactly what I think they are. We don't really know much about Chemosh, or Chemosh, or however you decide to pronounce him. That's pretty much all we know about him. Is that was trying to check my notes here if I had something down about him. Chemosh is the god that they were allegedly sacrificing children to.
Okay.
So it was just more, but the sculpture stones were probably, if their patron or patron deity was Chemosh, the sculptured stones were definitely going to be idols to Chemosh. He was probably seated, like El was. We have a lot of figurines from El. I'm going off of what I know from the deities in the area. Most of the time, they were sitting. It means they were pacified. If they were standing, they're a bit aggro or aggressive, or it's also representation of strength. But if they're sculptured stones, they're obviously idols made of wood, which I think Jeremiah goes into saying not to do. But anyway,
right. But the point is, he makes his escape by desecrating their sacred space on his way back.
Which leads you back to harem. I see what you. So it leads back to harem. Thank you. I lost track there. It leads us back to that harem warfare that we were talking about earlier. You have to either devote it to destruction, or it's separated and devoted to destruction. So
it's just really interesting. You just see, if you get the lay of the land of sacred space and how that works in all of these, because it basically works the same in all of these cultures. They prepare it differently, they cleanse it differently, they have different rituals to maintain it, but they all have the same basic concept of sacred space, which is where divine encounters happen.
Yeah, they did too.
So Ehud has just killed the king. The Moabites have been defeated because the king is dead, and he makes his escape, desecrating right through their sacred space and treading on the territory of their God on the way back, just to announce that God has saved them from the Moabites. I just that's just one of those fun little details.
I like the fact there's this motif called the chaos comp motif, where you have disorder, and then usually in ancient Near East it's called a deity or a hero comes out, kills a chaos creature, establishes order, creates the universe and everything within it, creates humanity, and then there's a palace or a temple built for him or her, and then at the end he or she takes up residence and authority in that temple or palace. So, and there's your sacred space in that temple or palace. The literary structure is all over. It's usually 4 parts. There's usually disorder, there's chaos, and then there's some sort of theomachy, which is a battle of the gods. The hero emerges, killing the chaos creature. A palace is created, and then actually there's 5 if you consider creation itself part of that literary structure, and then the palace. And then he takes up rest, like at the end of Genesis 1. No, Genesis 2:4 or 2:3. He says, yeah, he takes up residence, which just means he takes up his throne. He starts ruling. So we have that in Exodus, in the book of Exodus. And also when they go to Israel, we have that chaos conf motif here too, where the chaos is the Canaanites. All the Canaanites are all the chaos. And then God just sort of comes in and defeats the chaos monster creature in the form of the Canaanites, and then creates sacred space there for the Israelites to live in. That was the plan. Now, of course, with the conquest narrative all throughout the book of Joshua, they don't really do so well with conquest. So they have to just, well, we tried, we'll just settle here, and then we'll intermarry, which we know the law says we're not supposed to do, but we'll do it anyway.
Yeah. So then the next time we see the Moabites after this really is the book of Ruth. And everybody loves the book of Ruth, and which is interesting because it's one of these motifs that you see about a foreigner coming in and being not only included, but she is the great grandmother of King David and or great grandmother. I can never remember. There's how many greats there are in there, but she becomes in the line of the king. So you go from don't marry this woman. There's a rule. There's a Torah is very specific. Do not intermarry with the Moabites. And that's exactly what God sets up to happen. So even the Moabites. So we've got the Hittites included with Bathsheba. We've got the Moabites included with Ruth. I mean, it's very interesting. God's enemies are still brought in by these foreign women. It's a fascinating. Where did that prohibition of marrying against the Moabites come from? Do you remember? I was going to look it up, but I can't remember.
I was going to say it goes back to Numbers, just like you said, or because it was a mixed multitude that came out of Deuteronomy 7 says it was a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt. So you didn't just have the family line of Abraham coming out. You had other Egyptians, you had Libyans, you may have had Nubians. I know there's debate about Moses' second wife, but anyway. You had all these different, and they were picking up people on the way. I think Ruth kind of alludes to that. I think the book of Ruth kind of alludes to that, where they were just marching along in the wilderness, and then you had then they came along with the Moabites, and people would join the mixed multitude. It looks like I'm hopping on camera, but I'm not. But they would join the mixed multitude. And they'd get bigger.
So it's really interesting.
Or it could be all.
These women are also included in Matthew's genealogy, which I also find really fascinating.
I love that.
Ruth is there, and Bathsheba is remembered as the wife of Uriah. So they're not going to let Uriah be lost in memory because he did nothing wrong. And so I think it's really interesting, but they both show up in Matthew's genealogy a little bit later. Is there anything else that we could pull out that would be really, I think, interesting to know about the Moabites, except they did a lot of really offensive things to God and ended up on his bad list?
So, not really. I mean, they still show up. They still kind of show up. They're still there. They're paying tribute to, I think it was the Babylonians. Let me see here. Yeah, Tiglath. They're paying tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So they're still showing up in the archaeological record in the 8th century, along with Ammon, which we'll get to in a minute. By about the same time that Nebuchadnezzar II sacks Jerusalem for the second time in 582, 83, sometimes it's 83. The Moabites kind of go away after that. That's the last time we hear of them on the archaeological record. They're just gone. So other than that, that's about it.
All of
Yeah.
those ones in that list that we read, the seven nations condemned by God, end up wiped off the planet. You don't see anybody running around that's a Hittite anymore. You don't see anybody running around who's a Moabite anymore. You just they all pass out of history. It wasn't instantaneous, but they all just disappear, except for the records of archaeology and what we find in scripture. And so, which leads us to the Amalekites. And I really wanted to include these guys because they're fascinating to me, because talk to us about the lack of information on the Amalekites in archaeology, because I know you were like, there's not much.
There's nothing on them outside the Bible. There is nothing on the Amalekites outside of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Nothing. Some people write them off as fictional, as made up. Some of them write them off. We just haven't found any information on them. Scripture alludes that they're probably in the south. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the Levant at a map, you've got the Philistines there on the coast in the southern Levant. You have Judah, that would be Judah. Then east of that in the Transjordan, you had Moab, Ammon, you had the Moabites, the Ammonites, you had the Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, and then the Arameans on top, going from south to north. The Amalekites were more than likely, if they existed, I think they did, but I just can't prove it. We're on the south side. We're south of Judah, probably between Egypt and Judah. That's where more than likely they were. But again, there's no archaeological record.
Yeah, what are our hints in scripture? They show up in Exodus 17, where it says, then Amalek came and fought with Israel at, I can't pronounce that one. There's certain word sound combinations that I just can't pronounce, and this is one of those words. Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, come, choose some men for us to go out to fight with Amalek. And this is where Moses goes up on the hill and holds his arms up. And as long as his arms are up, then they're winning. And when he drops his arms and gets tired, then they start losing. So Caleb and Joshua hold his arms up so that they can defeat the Amalek and his people with the sword. So that's the first time we really see, other than the mention of Lot's daughters, that's the Amorites. Never mind. So this Moabites, is Moabites, and
didn't they show up in David?
Go ahead.
Didn't they show up in David? Or am I confusing him with the Agagite? It might be the Agagite. I thought it was an Amalekite. I think I'm getting him confused with.
He was an Ammonite. Ammonite. Good grief! No, okay. I'm getting tongue tied. Okay, good. The next time we see them is in Deuteronomy 25, and it's this is where I really, why I like your theory that they were coming out of Egypt, because it says, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey out of Egypt, and how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, struck down all who lagged behind you. He did not fear God. Therefore, the Lord your God has given you the rest of all your enemies on every hand in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess. You will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget, which is really interesting, because I think this is the only nation that we see get this level of like cursing from God. Is the Amalekites. Good grief. So they really, I think, I'm wondering, so this just occurred to me, Adam, and I'm wondering if, because of when the Deuteronomy is happening, because it's kind of a later compilation of memories of after the diaspora. So is the Amalekites possibly somebody who would have been covered under the Hittite umbrella, that is one of those tribal groups?
They would have been under the Egyptian umbrella rather than the Hittite umbrella. So what does this say? We're talking about early Iron Age, so the empires are gone. They're still there, but they just don't. The power is gone. There's no power. So there's this power vacuum. But if they were still in existence in the late Bronze Age during the Exodus, Egypt was still there. They would have been under Egyptian hegemony. They would have been under their influence. They would have been probably a vassal of them, or they could have been like the Shazu, or just semi-nomads wandering around the Sinai Peninsula or even Arabia. So they could have been that.
So
I like to think that they were nomads, like shepherd nomads, like the Shazu tribes were. So
okay, yeah, because this is a period of time where there's a lot of nomads that are
yeah,
floating around, which is partly why I would think we don't have a whole lot of them in archaeology, because nomads don't leave a whole lot of trails behind. You have to have
correct.
settlements for buildings and trash
Yeah.
dumps and stuff like that. So the nomads are harder to track.
And we only know the Shazu people because of the Egyptians recording them. They didn't leave anything for themselves, as far as I know. So
yeah. And then the next time we see them really prominently is King Agag in 1 Samuel 15.
That's it.
And yeah. So this is the fall of Saul and him being rejected as king. And so and it says, Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now, therefore, listen to the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did opposing Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So God is still mad by the time, from Moses to Saul. God is still like remembering these guys not in a good way. And says, now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them. And this is one of those hard sections of scriptures. Kill both the men, the women, the children, the infant, the ox, the sheep, the camel, the donkey. He's like, wipe them out.
Yeah. And there's like debate. Is that war rhetoric? Is that not war rhetoric? Do they really go in and wipe out the women and children? We're not sure. So yeah, we just don't know. Should have taken care of business before Saul, but he failed.
Yeah, and this is where they start. This is really interesting because this is the story where they start David, the House of David series on Amazon is here.
Yeah.
Because Saul has got King Agag chained in humiliation, accepting sacrifices. He didn't. First, he lets the Kenites escape, and then he takes Agag prisoner and humiliates him, accepts a bunch of stuff for sacrifice, and profits from the Amalekites, and he is told to obliterate them. So it is Saul who really is the one who kind of brings this on his own head, because he gets rebuked by Samuel and said, because of you brought this king here, surely this, he just brings it on Solomon's head, or Saul's head. Samuel does, because he's like, no, God told you to wipe these guys out and you didn't. And eventually, and I think that the House of David did a really nice portrayal of this, because you could see how spiritually dark this whole thing was. And it just, Samuel ends up cutting the guy's head off because he's like, you were supposed to do this. Now I have to do it, which is not the role of a prophet. Prophets were not called to kill people. That was not part of their calling. So that's really interesting. So you've got this, and I think that's part of why the Amalekites just completely disappeared, because God's like, erase them. These are no good nomadics. Just get rid of them. And sometimes that is like, I want to touch on what you said again there, because sometimes in the Old Testament and in ancient Near East literature, so this is not just Israel who's doing this. This is Egypt. This is all of them. Adam, you can speak to this better than I can. Yeah. When you're talking the bluster and the puffery and the rhetoric that's going on in these ancient cultures, because everybody wants to pop up and look bigger and look like scarier and exaggerate. And so they get creative with the numbers, and they get very creative and loud with, the intensity of the language that they're using. It doesn't necessarily mean that the entire population of the Amalekites was completely destroyed. It just means that the deity, the god of Amalekites, had to be destroyed. So the power of their deity had to be broken. And so they had to get rid of enough of them to defeat the deity. So it's because in the Old Testament, well, in the New Testament too, and even now, we are the cosmic scope of everything is so much bigger, and they did not experience the world as the everyday world and the spiritual world. To them, it was all the same thing happening at the same thing. So this was spiritual warfare. So a lot of this physical language was spiritual and claiming spiritual territory and reclaiming sacred space and toppling deities, which God has been doing since Genesis. So this is don't let the bluster. It's hard to read, but don't let the bluster kind of get you in this, oh, God is this angry, wrathful, bloodthirsty, deity that just wipes people out. There's a spiritual significance to that is going to, I don't want to say soften, because a lot of it's war, people died, and a lot of horrible things happen. But this is bigger and cosmic than our now modern, clean little modern lives really kind of get our heads around. So Adam, if you can just for a second, just kind of with the summary of those three nations, just kind of like the bigger spiritual warfare picture that they're kind of painting.
Well, we kind of touched on the sacred space, and I think that's what's really going on, because they probably viewed it, the Israelites probably viewed it as chaos and disorder, as Dr. Walton calls it, was disorder. And when they left Egypt, the Exodus happens, they cross the Red Sea, which is a picture of salvation. They wander around the desert for 40 years, and they arrive on the backside of the desert in the Levant. You got all this chaos going on. The Jebusites, Perizzites, I don't know. Everyone's worshiping different gods. Idolatry is rampant throughout the land, and the Yahweh looks at it and goes, "Yeah, we got to take care of this chaos going on. We got to get rid of this idolatry going on." We could even go a step further and say, for those of your viewers who have read Dr. Heiser's work on this, it's the deities were supposed to be pointing towards God. They're supposed to be saying, no, don't worship us, worship Yahweh. And they didn't do that. They just turned on Yahweh and said, no, you got to worship us. So because of Deuteronomy 32:8 saying that they were allotted land and ethnic groups and stuff. So you see all this chaos going on, and Yahweh's like, well, we got to take care of it. So they go in, the conquest starts, and it's them literally trying to create sacred space for themselves so Yahweh can worship, or Yahweh's doing it.
Yeah.
So Yahweh's doing battle with the false gods and trying to wipe out idolatry in the area. And that's the picture we have. And when he does, then we can create the temple, we can build the temple, and then he can take up his rulership in the temple. So you see that chaos comp motif that we mentioned earlier coming in the form of the conquest narrative.
Right. And this bigger picture, really, I want to kind of hit on this too, because this is why what they're doing is so offensive to God, because everything in God's creation is God's sacred space. Like he created it, called it very good. And now there are people desecrating the land, and they are idolatry. So let's just a quick side tangent here, Adam, because this is one of my favorite side tangents to do now, because actually when you go back and you look at the language in Genesis and the creation account in chapter 2, I believe. Is it chapter 1? It's one of those two. And I think it's chapter 2, because you're getting into the details of the creation of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
But the language that's used there is actually the Hebrew word for idol. we were created as walking, talking idols of God. And so when you replace that and you take a carved image and try to make it do what we were meant to do, to point each other to God, then that becomes a really big problem, because you are taking away creation and humans' worship of God. And so it is to him an offense and a perversion beyond the level that we can't quite understand. So all of this sacrificing to other idols, the story that we kind of alluded to, where they bring the items into the temple, and the god keeps falling on his face in front of the items, and
Dagon.
Yes, it's Dagon, and you just kind of like that idolatry is such an offensive practice, because it usurps the entire purpose of the creation of humanity in the first place. So like, it's a big problem that all of these nations are involved in idolatry. They're all involved and sacrificing, because we see from Torah, and we talked about this in our Torah series, Adam, how one of those things that was very hard to be forgiven for and had very stiff penalties was the taking of another human life, because you were taking away the image of God from someone else, and you were extinguishing that image. So it is sacrificing an image bearer to another deity is extremely offensive. Yeah. And so God's like, we have to get drastic to put a stop to this. And the Israelites failed in their mission to be so different that every other nation would want to come to Yahweh, and they failed miserably at it with this. And you see it culturally all around them, the rampant, just we've talked about some of those old ancient cultures before, and how.
Yeah, I was going to add, in Mesopotamian Egypt, if a statue of the king or a god, if someone created a statue of a king or god, an idol in Mesopotamian Egypt, they believed that it was an image of the king or god. Like you would see the image of the king or god, and then they would worship it, which is idolatry, of course. But in the Old Testament, we see, at least at the beginning, that we are walking, talking images. We are, that's where that idol image comes from. We're not idols, but we have the image of God on us, much like those statues did of the king or of the deity. So, yeah, absolutely. It puts it into like a greater perspective that way, I think.
Right. And because of that context, we're going to look at, so what in the world, and this is more of my setup question, because I don't expect you to know this, because this is where I'm going to kind of step in, and we're going to get really fun with some Orthodox stuff here, and some Orthodox theology. So you've got these three typologies in the Old Testament, these bad guys. So, you've got the, hang on. My brain just kind of went down. So the Hittites were kind of the imperial giants, and they're just kind of, in various forms causing problems. And the Moabites are the seductive neighbors, seducing them into idolatry and sacrificing things they're not supposed to be sacrificing. And then you've got the Amalekites, who are those eternal raiders of the borderlands, that are the mercenaries picking off the people of God and taking out the weak. And then, and so you've got these. So how in the world are those three typologies, in the bad guys in the Old Testament, become types of sanctification? So first I want to define the term there, sanctification, because that is a word that gets a lot, it's very confused and very different in various traditions. So, and I use the Protestant word for that because the Orthodox word confuses people. So we talk about this process of theosis, which is the transit, which is the perfection of the image of God into the image of Christ. And that's, but Protestants kind of break that down into sanctification, justification, glorification, salvation. There's another one I don't remember. Yeah, there's a lot of shuns in there. There's like 5 or 6 of them I forgot. I tend to forget some of that stuff now. I don't have, but so that's what we're talking about. When I'm talking about typologies of sanctification, I'm talking about they show us this. They're the typology of this perfection of the image of Christ. But how in the world do we get these baddies in the Old Testament who show us this path into theosis and into becoming more Christ, like into the full image of Christ? So we have to step back a little bit, talk about the metaphysics of Saint Maximus the Confessor, who is really into the cosmology, and he's called the cosmological architect. And he gets into a lot of, leans in really heavily into the cosmic nature of the incarnation, and the logos in John 1:14, the logos, the word became flesh and tabernacled among us, and how that's not just us individually or us as people, but that also encompasses all of the cosmos. So all of the cosmos is redeemed from the fall, because all of it is affected in the fall. And so it's this idea of his theology is this inner, this divine intervention as a cosmic architect embedded within all created things and historical events. So even these baddies in the Old Testament are there to help repoint and reorient Israel back to God. They're supposed to be like, nope, you're not supposed to do this. And their stand as a mirror to their bad behavior, and also as a corrective to bring about their repentance to return to Yahweh, which is what we see as our mirror. And so I'm going to talk about three of my favorite saints and kind of how these paths kind of go. So you've got this Hittite path where we're looking at the 2 Samuel, the mercenary themes of the Hittites that we talked about at the beginning, that in landing on, like, looking at the example of Uriah, who was righteous and didn't do anything wrong, but David still set him up, killed him, and took his wife. But that is like the Hittite mercenary is displaying this flawless covenant loyalty, contrasted with the king of David, who is behaving like a lawless pagan despotite, right? So they are the opposites of the roles they're supposed to be in.
Binary.
And right. And so where we would see that like examples in Unorthodox theology, we would contrast or kind of mirror that with a saint called Saint Moses the Black, or sometimes he's called Saint Moses the Ethiopian. I think he's the Ethiopian. Yeah, the Ethiopian. And he's a really interesting story, because he is one who was a mercenary himself for a very long time, and then someone exposed him to the gospel, and he became Orthodox and became a monk, and spent a long time in seclusion repenting, and became like, one day he was called on to settle a disagreement among some of the other monks, and he came into the room with a giant jar of sand on his back, and he said, I am here to judge the behaviors of my brother, just showing how ridiculous what they were asking him to do was, because, that's like, who am I to judge the hearts of others? And in that, we see him in his last stand. The monastery is under threat by a pack of mercenaries, and Saint Moses gets everyone out to safety, and he makes one last stand, and he has a weapon that he never uses, and he is killed in the attempt, and but he saved all of his brothers in the monastery, survived, but he just, so this path of someone who's gone down this road of this mercenary type lifestyle of taking things that don't belong to you and attacking people and picking off the weak and preying on the vulnerable. And Saint Moses the Black comes in as the antitype for that, and shows us that through this life of repentance, that behavior and that can be repented from, and you can eventually find your way back and into the fullness of the image of God. And it's just like, it's such a beautiful story how that mirrors that sanctification path, the transformation of the warrior, and shows that people who are labeled as outsiders possess the capacity for absolute devotion. So, our whatever we labels we judge each other by don't really matter. It's the heart to return to Christ and to be fully living into our Christian identity. So, which is I just he's one of my he's one of my new favorite saints. And then we talk about like the Moabite path, and we get this idea of this seducing, and they're constantly seducing Israel to come away with getting to idolatry and just the infant sacrifice and the debauchery and everything that's going on, and with the Hittites there, and the story of Saint Mary of Egypt. And so the Moabites are representing these like high places of Chemosh and ancestry border crossing of Genesis 19 and seductive compromise and Baal Peor and all these things. And Saint Mary began her life as say a woman of the world, but she didn't get paid for it. She just did it because she enjoyed the debauchery and the behavior. And so and she did that for 17 years. And then she felt this calling from an Orthodox church, and she tried to go inside, but she was barred. She was blocked. She couldn't go in. And she realized that she was being barred from going in by the Virgin Mary, by the Theotokos. And when she finally got to see an icon of the Theotokos, she realized where her life was and the path that she was on, and how damaged and wounded she was and the behavior that she was in. So she made a vow to go out, and spent 47 years in the desert repenting for that behavior. And when she ran out of her own things to repent for, she just started repenting for everybody else and creation, and just spent her life basically out in the desert. And then when St. Zosimus was out on his own little pilgrimage, ran into her one day, and it's quite the, I'll let everybody go look up the story of St. Mary of Egypt and the conversation with St. Zosimus. But it's a beautiful conversation, because he thought he was walking into possibly entertaining an angel, and he's trying to get her to bless him, and she's trying to get him to bless her. And he ends up giving her communion, giving her the Eucharist, and promises to come back the next year to give it to her again. And when he came back the next year, she had died. She'd passed away. And then he recorded her life story later, because she told him this whole sordid tale. But her time of transformation in the wilderness, as she sits in the desert, just representing the ultimate conquest over that inner Moabite that we all have, to go and get pulled off into those things that we shouldn't be doing. We all have our things. Let's just be honest. We all have our things. And she shows us that inner Moabite that can be overcome. Just that there's that bad blood of the Moabites, so to speak, is purified through Christ. It's just such a beautiful story that you don't have to end up being a Moabite. That St. Mary of Egypt shows us how to do that. And then I think my favorite one here is the Amalekite path, because you see these underhanded predatory enemy who are attacking from behind. They're weak. They're attacking the weak. They're they're ruthless in their power and predatory in their violence. And and you see what happens to them. God wipes them off the face of the earth, and we only remember them because they're in Scripture. But then you contrast that with the path of Saint Edward the Confessor. Now, Saint Edward the Confessor was a king of England, and I can't remember when, because I'm not as good with the Latin saints as I am with some of the other ones. But Saint Edward the Confessor came to
wasn't Longshanks.
power.
I know that.
He was the one who built Westminster Abbey, actually, as a matter of fact.
Oh, okay.
Saint Edward the Confessor. Yes, but he came to power, and he is famous for being this antitype of the Amalekites, because instead of ruling with earthly power, he at this time they had an army tax or a war tax, right? So everybody had to pay this tax for this standing army that he inherited from his predecessors. He canceled the tax. He sent the army home so that they could just go and live their lives. And he became one who ruled through peace and through the protection of within his realm, and was also known for deep charity, and was one of the few kings who was monogamously married for his entire life and didn't have any, concubines, didn't have any extra wives or anybody like that running around. So he ruled his kingdom in, the opposites of the Amalekites, not using power, not picking off the weak, not exploiting the vulnerable. He did that through prayer, through peace, and through charity, and was able to protect and grow England under King Edward the Confessor's reign. It's pretty cool because he, like I said, he got to big Westminster Abbey, and there's just some really cool stuff there that he did in that. So in him, by conquering the invisible Amalekite, Saint Edward is representing the earthly sovereign who conquered the Amalekite of the soul by wrestling with those temptations, demons, whatever you want to call them, passions of anger, greed, and domination that all of us, let's just be honest, we all struggle with those. And so you see this beautiful picture of someone who is like the opposite. So we can learn, like, here is where this path leads to destruction in the Old Testament. But we see this in Christ taking this path of being the opposite. So I think to pull all those together, I really want to land in two of my favorites. So the inclusion of the unincluded with St. Ruth, who we mentioned briefly back there, but and she was the ancestral enemy, but through love and loyalty broke through that law of exclusion of Deuteronomy 23:3, which is where it comes from. I knew I had it in my notes somewhere. So in Deuteronomy 23:3 is but she breaks through that to become the matriarch of the Messiah, which is absolutely amazing to me, that she just did what her mother-in-law told her to do. And the story there is really, I think we should do a Ruth episode because it's such a fun story. But, just all of the fun of going on in Hebrew there and all of the fun craziness. But she just really shows us that an ancestral enemy, through that love and loyalty, breaks through that law of exclusion to become, she gets honored to be the matriarch of the Messiah. I mean, I can't even imagine how awesome is that to realize that at some point, my great grandson or whoever is King David, who is
King David,
becomes in the line of the Messiah. Like, that has got to be amazing. And then also we call her Saint Fatima, but y'all know her as the woman at the well, right? And so, yes, so we call her Saint Fatima. And as a Samaritan, she is also ethno-religious baddie, because Samaritans did not have a good reputation by the time we get to the Gospels. They were very much you could kind of put any of those labels on them. They were just you were not allowed to intermarry with the Samaritans. They had, they were very much on the outs.
Of course, yeah.
But here you see, this woman, and she carries that Moabite weight of a fractured life, and Christ meets her at that well. And wells, interestingly enough, Adam, are sites of Old Testament betrothal, which is really a fascinating detail. So you see him meet her there, and she is the first one outside of his circle of the 12 in that small gathering. She's the first one that he tells that he is the Messiah. And she is treated as the great equal to the apostles because she brings her entire family. She brings an entire village, and her family becomes this amazing, we know through church history, become these amazing evangelists, and the entire family goes to their martyrdom for their evangelism work and spreading the gospel message. But it's just this, again, breaking through this curse.
That whole scene of The Chosen still tears me up, by the way.
It's just amazing. So I think the takeaway for me, and then I really want to hear your thoughts, because that's a very fast speed through some very, foreign theology to Protestants. So this is going to be a little weird for some of you, and that's okay, because we deal with the weird sometimes. But sanctification is not like sanctification or theosis is not a wall that keeps the unclean out, but it's a fire that purifies the outsider and draws them into the center of the Holy and Holies. We are meant to be in relationship with God, in a very intimate relationship with God. Eventually, ultimately, we are standing face to face with Christ himself in glory and eternity, God willing. But we were made for relationship with God, and this process of sanctification, and this, that the whole shuns in the Protestant world, and theosis in my world, it burns out that dross. It removes those things that are not that make us so we're not able to be in God's presence, so we can stand in the Holy of Holies with God. It's just, to me, it's just such an amazing and beautiful thing how even the paths of these baddies in the Old Testament show us that ultimately there is always still hope. And we see that in the lives of people who go all in and being serious about their faith and serious about pursuing Christ. Like, it's just a beautiful thing. So what are your thoughts here, Adam? I threw a lot at you there.
I wanted to add to it, because in the book of Joshua, we have two characters that embody the opposites. We have Achan, who's part of the Israelites, and then we have Rahab, who's a foreigner. And you see them both. You see Rahab is included, like you mentioned about Ruth. She comes in, she entreats the spies, and then the spies go back and let her know, and then her whole family gets saved. So there's that inclusion bit with Rahab. And if you compare that with Achan, who was part of the Israelites, sinned, I forget which chapter, I think it's 7. He sins by coveting and taking the Babylonian robe because it was shiny, it was sparkly, and all these things that were devoted to destruction. And he's stoned to death. He and his family are stoned to death. So you see this contrast between Rahab and her family, how they were saved and included as foreigners, and Achan, who's from within, is slain because of keeping stuff that was devoted to harem. So I wanted to add that like like Ruth, she was included like a foreigner as well. I think it's a great. I've heard of Moses the Black. I've heard of Moses the Black, but I didn't know the significance. Edward the Confessor, I've heard from my Catholic friends. The third, who was the third one?
Oh, Saint Mary of Egypt. Yeah, she's
Saint Mary of Egypt. I've never heard. But I did like the one that stood out to me was Ruth, and the inclusion. It was her, and it's unfortunate what happened to her sister-in-law. She wanted to stay behind and stuff, but the inclusion part got to me. So that one was pretty cool. And then you compared that with Moses
Speaking of Rahab, she was another, like Saint Mary of Egypt. She was a woman of the world as well, because we see that she is referred to that way. And so
that way,
it's all of us come with a past. All of us come with a future, with a present. We all got stuff.
We get a future. So, and then we get a future.
That's right. So, we all have a past that we're still dealing with in the present, but we have a hope for a future. And this perfection to become the full image of Christ, which is what the image of God, when it's given is incomplete, which is why it's only declared very good instead of perfect, because it's waiting for the incarnation and the perfection in Christ. So it is just, I could nerd out about this all day.
Yeah.
It's just such cool stuff.
That's why I love literary criticism of scripture. I know criticism gets a negative. It doesn't mean what a lot of people think it means. It just means you're critiquing it, you're studying it, and everything. That's why I love literary criticism. I was kind of turned on to that with my bachelor's degree, And now I get to apply it to the Bible, and it's great because these are things when I first came to Christ weren't known to me. So when I get to apply literary criticism to it, one of the first things that stood out was Abraham, right after the War of the Nine Kings in Genesis 14 and 14. He is approached by the king of Sodom and the king of Jerusalem or Salem. And one represents the world, our past, and the other one represents Christ. And he chose the one for Christ, and he gave a tithe. He tithed. So things like that stand out more, and it's more meaningful and impactful. So, yeah, there was the same thing with Cain and Abel. When Cain was excluded because of murder, and then he goes off. He was supposed to be a wanderer, and he goes off and builds a city. He has family. He builds a city, but he wasn't supposed to have a home, but he builds one for himself in defiance to God. Whereas, as opposed to Abel, who unfortunately, whom he killed, and then you get the Seth line and you get the parallels between the Seth line and the Cain line, and everything. So things like that stand out now for me when it comes to that. But yeah.
I just, I think I will, I hope, okay, I guess I will rephrase that. I hope I will never forget the lessons that I learned from Dr. Ray Lubeck, because he really schooled us. Those of us who got deeper into just the one class that he taught and took more of his stuff in conversations with him, the radical shift between and getting into literary criticism and narrative criticism, and like it just blew everything wide open in such a way that, I remember listening to him railing against historical critical and how myopic and limited it was. And
it's crazy.
And I get heat sometimes because I don't do a lot of the, verse by verse breakdown, historical critical stuff on my channel, but there's so many more beautiful things to look at if you step back and look at the narrative. You look at the literary structure. It's amazing.
Yeah. If you look at the structure, the narrative, and the content, and then if you put that against a historical backdrop, it makes the meaning stand out. There's much more you can get from scripture than just verse by verse. I'm not saying that's not important, because you need the verse. It's like learning a language. You first learn words, and then you learn phrases, and then you learn sentences, and then you learn paragraphs. And that's what it is. But words themselves don't carry meaning. It's the structure of the sentence and the paragraph and so on and so forth that creates the meaning. And if you just focus on one verse and then preach from that one verse, you're not going to get a meaningful message out of that.
Yep. So, which is why I do what I do, because sometimes we need to step back and look at these bigger pictures and these bigger patterns and these bigger things that you would never, I got this harebrained idea, and I was like, we have these bad guys in the Old Testament for a reason, but they're not just left in the Old Testament. They have to have some kind of significance. So what do we learn from these guys? And I was like, Adam, let's do this.
Let's do this.
And it was like, at first I thought you were going to be like, that's crazy. But you were like, yeah, I'm down. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Because
I don't know how we're going to spin it, but we'll do it.
I think I am happy with the way that it came out, because I think we gave some really good, I think you did a very nice job of walking through the historical context and some of the things that were going on there and helping us understand that, so that we have a good basis to then jump to the bigger narrative look at how thematically and typology and all of those things that we get to play with in literary and narrative criticism, and looking at these bigger things. And then even more fun for me being Orthodox, you get an even bigger field to play in, because you got all the stories of the saints and all this really cool stuff that you get to pull in as well. So, but I think the point of the story and the whole point of my channel and with my new tagline that I have of waking up to mystery. Like there's just so many amazing things in there that, to steal from Dr. Michael Heiser, I dare you to bore me with the Bible, because at this point, I don't know that I could. I even have fun nerding out about the genealogies and chronicles and numbers. Okay, like that's how seriously bad I am about it. But there is always something that is like cool hidden stuff in there that ties into the bigger story that just makes it so it's cosmic in scope, and that we will never get our heads around it. But like the book of Job, you just get to stand there and look at this amazing thing and going, wow, I can't believe I get to be a part of this. This is cool. Like, how amazing is this? Like, I just, anyway. So thank you, Adam. We are
not a problem. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
We are, now that we're both recovering, so in the recovery process from school, we'll have to have you back a few more times, because we always have.
I've got time now. I've got time. I've still got to get some things going on my channel, or otherwise I still need a monitor. And that's really all I need. I thought I had one, but I don't. So when I get the monitor set up, I'll be able to create content.
So hopefully you'll be able to get some content out, though, because I always really enjoy.
I've written the scripts; they're all ready. I just got to actually find a monitor to record.
So hopefully we'll get to see some content coming out from, because if you haven't subscribed, I linked his channel in the show notes underneath. Go check out Linguisamo. This is a great, if you like to nerd out on the ancient Near East and you want to learn about the languages and the cultures in the ancient Near East, Adam's channel is one of the best, and it is definitely underappreciated. So please go subscribe, watch his content. It is good stuff. Actually, it's sometimes I get lazy and I'll just go watch Adam's content instead of doing some of my own research.
Yes.
It's good stuff.
Shun responsibility and watch. No, I'm just kidding. But
it's good stuff. But no, seriously, it is really good stuff. Adam does a very nice job. And there's some of those that are really fun. And there's a lot of shorts on there, so you don't have to spend 2.5, 3 hours watching a video like some of the rest of us.
What I want to do is use the shorts to create longer content, but that way, if you guys don't have 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you can just go, he's got a short about this. I'll just watch the minute short and it's about it and get the gist.
Good stuff, and good bite-sized digestible chunks that you can kind of really. So yes, definitely go check out Adam's channel. I am looking forward to when you get to be able to start putting out some new stuff and get your stuff recorded and really releasing stuff. And so, Adam, thank you so much for being a good sport. This was a little bit. The second half was a little out of your wheelhouse, I know, but
a little bit. It's all good.
But that's the fun part. We get to bring two people's areas of expertise together, and then you kind of see like where it goes, because I don't know how many people other than us would put the ancient Near East cultures together with Orthodox saints and come up with something hopefully watchable. So, but yeah, thank you so much. We definitely look forward to having you back again. And I have got some stuff coming out next week. I have a new channel friend coming on. His name is Father Ron, who his channel is Remote Orthodoxy. And I want to talk to you about this afterwards, because this series kind of blew my mind. I want to get your thoughts on this, but he's coming next week. And I was supposed to interview Dr. Amber Dillon on Thursday. That has been moved to August 13th because she had to reschedule. So, but she has a new book out on the intertextuality of John the Baptist, which is, I read it. I guess that was one of those things. I was with her TA and she's like, here, read this and make sure there's no typos. And I was like, I'm terrible at grammar. I don't know why you're giving me this, but I got to read it before it was published. And so I'm so excited to have her. She is a fantastic scholar. She is an amazing lady. And she was a huge part of getting me through seminary and teaching me a lot about intertextuality and sharpening my skills to be not as sadly lacking as they were before I spent a year and a semester with her. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got more. We got 3 more parts of the Baruch series coming, and Phil Bray and I are going to be doing some stuff. We've got there's just some really good stuff that's coming down the pipe here on my channel. Now that I have time to make content, I'm just kind of like pumping out content like it's kind of fun. So I will see you all next week on Tuesday when Father Ron comes on the channel. We're going to be talking about Genesis 1 through 11. So I'll give you guys a little hint there. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I hope you all have a very blessed day. And every day, thank you, Stephen. That means a lot. And every day, spend time with Christ and spend time in scriptures so that, yes, Roddy and I message back and forth. So he has seen the fact that I write in cuneiform instead of in English, because you get messages from me, they're full of typos and you're on your own. You have to decode those yourself, because the fact that I got it out at all is definitely a win at all. So anyway, don't forget, the Bible is a beautiful, mysterious book that we have so much beauty to look at every single time we go and we pick it up and we read it. So go and be blessed.